I am Ian Hobson, a pianist and conductor born in the UK and lived for many years in the United States. And I have been happy to be a professor at Seoul National University for the last 2.5 years. I've now finished my appointment, and it has been a privilege to work with colleagues and students from this part of the world, which I didn't know that I would have the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Ian. Ian, we would like to sort of trace back to your origin when you were born and sort of talk about the periods of your life, if that's possible. You were born in 1952. Yes, and that's not very far away from the end of the war. Yes,
that's right.
Second half. Could you talk about the general environment when you were born in England, in the region at the moment, and what was happening in the musical scene, how you came about your first contact with classical music, and why you decided to start?
That's a very good series of questions. I was born in 1952 in Wolverhampton, which is in the Midlands of Great Britain, very near to Birmingham. And it was after the war. It was after rationing had finished just recently, and so it was a very austere time in England. And I was an only child, and my parents were not particularly musical, although my father was very interested in amateur operatics, so I would from an early age go and see him perform in South Pacific, Oklahoma, and some of these musicals. And so I think that was a very nurturing experience for me. And especially in the piano, we didn't have a piano, an instrument in the house, but we had a toy piano. And when I was 3, I was playing on this toy piano, and I was reproducing themes from the radio. We would listen to BBC radio, and so they found me reproducing these themes rather accurately, and so then the family bought a piano for me when I was 4, and then I learned to play by ear on the piano before I had lessons, and when I was 5 I had lessons, learned to read music, and then went on to other things. But I think it's an interesting way of starting. It's very different from learning to read music and then learning to expand your repertoire from one piece to another. When you learn to play by ear, it's more like jazz playing, and this is I don't know whether it's better, but it certainly expands one's horizons.
So you started to learn music by ear by yourself.
Yeah.
You had no teachers.
I had teachers. Yes, when I was 5, I had teachers. I had somebody who put paper behind the black keys with all of the letters of the alphabet, or A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so I learned to see what I was playing, and I to recognize what the names of the notes were, and then it was a quick move to start playing with music. We had in those days 78 RPM discs. It was before LPs, it was before CDs, it was before cassettes, and I had in the house a Mosevich recording, 78. On one side was the C-sharp minor prelude of Rachmaninoff, which I immediately wanted to get the music and learned. I could play the first page, but the second page was too difficult for me. And on the other side was the G minor prelude of Rachmaninoff, which was a fantastic piece of music, and played magnificently by Benno Mosevich, who was a friend, a fellow Russian pianist of Rachmaninoff, who lived in London, who lived in England at that time. And this captivated me, and the sound of this man. And so every time there was music on the radio, when I was 6 or 7 years old, when Mosevich was playing something, I said, that's Mosevich playing, because I could recognize his sound. And this was, an interesting fact. I don't know how I did it, but I could just recognize the mode of playing and the elegance of the playing.
So is this the one of the way? I mean, you had several ways of getting in touch or exploring or discovering repertoires in new music. So was this
Yes.
the main way for you to discover music, the recordings?
Recordings, yes. Also, I went to, my parents were kind of middle class people who liked music. They weren't opera buffs, or they weren't highbrow music people, anything but they went to the musicals. I remember going to see Kismet, a performance. Kismet is a musical production based on Prince Igor by Borodin. And the music was absolutely intoxicating. It was wonderful to hear that. And so these kinds of things had an influence on me. And I went to see South Pacific and Carousel and these Richard Rodgers presentations that my father was involved in. And I went to see other musicals. I went to see when it first came out, My Fair Lady, the movie with Rex Harrison, and this was a fabulous score, conducted by Andre Previn, by the way, and this was great music. I mean, this is not. I wasn't introduced to Marriage of Figaro and Carmen and Fidelio at this age, but I was introduced to popular music, which in many ways was based on the tradition of Western music, from a century earlier. So no matter how you're introduced to music, I think it's if it takes your imagination and captures your imagination, it's worth it.
How was the general environment during your youth? Did you have lots of friends of the same age who were studying pianos, other instruments? How was
No, not really.
music?
No. I had I felt pretty isolated in that sense. I had friends at school, of course, but not many of them were, if any, were interested in music. I knew that I wanted to do music from a very young age, but I was also interested in other things. I was interested in literature and other avenues of learning, and so I had some friends who played other instruments, oboe, viola, and I would accompany them. So I would start to understand chamber music, but no, I didn't have that many friends who were interested in pursuing music as a career. When I started studying seriously, probably when I was 13, 14, I had the opportunity to go to a teacher in London, because I was living in a regional town in England, Hereford, which was miles away from London, miles away from the cultural centre. So I would have to go for 3.5 hours on a steam train before electrification. Steam train into London, have my lessons, come back, another 3.5 hours. And this I did every 3.5 weeks or so. And so this started expanding my horizons in music and culture.
So obviously the landscape, musical landscape in Birmingham and London was quite different.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And how was that during 50s and 60s, during your youth and teens? How was classical music perceived by society and to people?
Well, I think that people prided themselves in being very interested in culture and very interested in music. They would attend the symphonies, their local symphonies, whether it was the City of Birmingham Symphony or it was the BBC Welsh Orchestra, or there was a strong musical culture around the country, which has been eroded these days, unfortunately, because of the internet and because of the opportunity to listen to all sorts of things and to watch all sorts of things. People don't tend to go out so much to concerts as they used to, and I think that in that sense, in the Far East, here in Korea, there is much more attendance at concerts generally than there is in the West now.
Going back to your when you started playing piano, do you still remember the tune that you reproduced from BBC Radio?
No, I don't. But I used to, reproduce tunes from TV commercials, because I didn't have a TV when I was young. Until I was probably 11 or 12. I didn't have a TV, but my grandparents had a TV, so when I would go there, I could see. So I remember the thing for the dishwashing detergent, which was very interesting. It was very liquid, very liquid. The hands that do dishes can feel soft as your face, with mild green fairy liquid. I remember this. A long time ago.
I think it's fantastic. It's just when you every time I know you're playing already, but every time I hear you playing, and now that I know how when you started to learn music, it was mostly by ear. I think maybe that's why you have that flowing sort of musicality compared to people who's really started with disciplined approach, where you learn do re mi, C D E, and then learn to read the score, and then everything's learned off to partitura first, and then yeah.
I don't know. Everybody comes at music from a different point of view. So, but I'm very happy that I learned by ear first, because then it frees one's mind to make the connections between what you see on the page and what it sounds like. I think when I teach, and I'm teaching people to memorize, or people ask me about memorization, and I say, look, what you need to do is to know what the chord that you're about to play sounds like. You need to know what it sounds like. Not to be surprised when you play something. And that's an important point, because then what you read and how you perceive the sound is so connected. I think this is the same is true with sight reading. If you can sight read music, and you can look at the next chord that's coming up and you know what it sounds like. Of course, it doesn't happen immediately, but after practice, when you can know what that sounds like, and there's how you want it to sound, and then it means something to you, instead of just searching for some group of notes that, okay, that's what it sounds like. No, you need to know what it sounds like, first of all. And that comes only from practice and just doing it over and over again.
Yeah, could you tell us one, could be several, but a memory from your teen before you left Birmingham, all this, since you're born to the time you left Birmingham, growing up, a story that strongly influenced you, or the one story, that moment that you remember, or
I don't know. There may be many things. As I said, I went down to London to play for this man who was named Sidney Harrison. He was a TV personality, also a very good pianist, very elegant sounding pianist, and he taught me to play with more authority, more adult kind of approach to the keyboard. And so the pieces that I I worked with at that age, when I was like 14, 15, so the first time I came in contact with Ravel's Albarada del Grazioso, and this was so exciting to find a piece like this, which had such exotic harmonies and repeated notes, which is, rapid, and also glissandi up and down the keyboard. Not only one note at a time, but sometimes thirds and fourths. So when you practice it, this is. It seems like almost an impossibility when you look at them on paper, but it's a great thing to do, and it's quite possible. It's quite possible, so that young people can feel that they have really achieved something miraculous by relaxing enough to play those kinds of things.
So at what age did you leave Birmingham?
No, I wasn't in Birmingham. I was close to Birmingham.
Yeah.
I was in Hereford, which is in the West Country, which is a market town near the Welsh border. And that's where I went to London for my lessons, first of all, when I was 13. When I was 14 and a half, the family moved to Coventry, which is a bigger town, a more industrial town. It's the car town where they make Jaguar and a lot of other car makes. And then I stayed there until I went to college. And this was a place that has a cathedral which was bombed heavily during the war, was destroyed actually by the German army. And the new cathedral was built there. So this was a very important time for me to come to this town. I went to the 5th anniversary of the War Requiem by Benjamin Britten. Benjamin Britten wrote the War Requiem for Coventry because of the cathedral and the town that had been destroyed. And I went to the performance, the fifth anniversary, which is in 1967, and this was a great moment for me. Also to attend other oratorios, St. Matthew Passion and so on, and to really become in contact with great choral music. And I studied the organ there, so I was, I was involved with choirs, and it was a great learning experience for me.
That's when you started the organ?
Yeah, that's when I started the organ, yeah. When I was 14.
How did you find the pedals?
It is difficult. It's very difficult. When you first start to learn the pedals, it's like trying to ride a bike. And you fall off many times. It's not easy. But having learned it, I think I can probably still play the organ. And it has been very useful to me, not only musically but economically, because I used it to get myself through school later in life, to be an organist and choir master at various churches. And one also comes in contact with the great music of Bach. I always maintained that, although we have the 48 preludes and fugues of Bach for the piano, or for the keyboard, for the harpsichord, the greatest preludes and fugues by Bach are for the organ. And those are magnificent pieces, which as pianist you can only come in contact with through Liszt or Busoni in the transcriptions, unless you play the organ. And if you play the organ, they're well worthwhile. I even remember when I went to Cambridge to study, I wanted to continue studying at the Royal Academy of Music, and I didn't have fees to do that. So I did something called I went to the Royal College of Organists, and I played the A minor Prelude and Fugue of Bach for the organ. And through that I got a scholarship to continue studying at the Royal Academy of Music. So it was very useful to me.
So you stayed in Coventry until you went off to college?
Yeah.
Is that correct? So I've read that you studied at Royal College of Music as well as
Royal Academy of Music.
Royal Academy of Music, as well as Cambridge. How did you do it at the same time? Or how,
yeah, I did do it at the same time. I was when I was 16.
Yes.
I did an exam for academic exam, which was an Oxbridge exam, as a Cambridge and Oxford special exam to get into one of those colleges, and I won an open scholarship to go to Cambridge, but I was only 16, so I couldn't go to college in Cambridge until I was 18. So in the interim year, when I was 17, I went to London to the Royal Academy of Music and continued my studies with Sidney Harrison, who I had mentioned earlier, and he was a professor there, so I studied there. And then when I got this scholarship from the College of Organists to continue my studies, I commuted between Cambridge and London for 2 years and studied both places.
So I presume from age 17 on, when you went on to pursue higher education, your lifestyle considerably changed, correct?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Was there any stress relating to that, or any anecdote relating to that? Could you?
No, I was just trying to keep up with my academic activities, and becoming 17, 18 years old. There are many many things that one has to deal with in life, and then I decided to make my studies at Cambridge shorter than normal, and I did an audition for Yale School of Music, graduate school, because I wanted to not only do academic music, but I wanted to really concentrate on performance, on piano, organ, conducting, and not do too much of the other academic subjects. So I accomplished that in 1972 when I went to I got into Yale Graduate School of Music, and I went over there, and then I never lived in England anymore. I did 3 years of study at Yale, did coursework for my doctorate degree, got a job at University of Illinois, and have been there ever since, until I came to Seoul National.
Before we move on to life in the States, we are very much aware of the fact that you're a fantastic conductor as well as pianist. When did you first come in touch with the idea of learning?
Quite early, actually. When I said I was an organist and choir master, even when I was a young boy in Coventry, I had a choir and played the organ, and occasionally would have a few trumpeters and extra musicians to play with the choir. So I did some Vaughan Williams pieces. So when I was 15, I started doing these things. When I was at Cambridge, I conducted ensembles, just amateur things, pieces of Walton or Bach cantatas, which I put together. But seriously, I started conducting in my second year at Yale. I became a conducting joint major, and really started to see how it was to have an influence or not have an influence on an orchestra. And it's an extremely difficult endeavor. Conducting is not. It looks easy, but it's not easy. So I went through all of the trials and tribulations of learning my craft as a conductor. But I'm glad that I did it at a relatively early age. And so when I had then studies at Aspen and Tanglewood with the great people in the 80s, I felt that this was very beneficial and that I had a good grounding in studies. Conducting is not so much just wielding a stick and doing something. It is knowing what things sound like. As I said, you need to know what a chord is going to sound like before you play it. In the orchestra, you need to know what you want something to sound like in the timbre of the instruments or the voices before it happens, because you have to have the concept in your head. Otherwise, you're just waving your arms and it doesn't mean anything. So it's something very intangible. It's not easy to say how you should do it, how you should study, how you should find your way. That's why there are so few good conductors in the world. But it is something that is worth pursuing, and it's a miraculous form of music making, because there's no question that a conductor's personality, conductor's mind, conductor's influence can make a tremendous difference in the perception of a composition.
And keeping subject with conducting, also the greatest art a conductor or conductors can possess is the ability to communicate without speaking.
Right.
During the performance, during the rehearsal, you cannot possibly explain everything that you're feeling or you're thinking or you're trying to accomplish. What is your secret in communicating with musicians on top of podium?
I don't know what the secret is. I think that what I try to do is to, with eye contact, not too obvious, but to show people, okay, now I would like you to be the most important person. Now I would like you to be just a little bit less important and let this one through. I mean, that is what it's all about. I remember I studied in Aspen, and Dennis Russell Davies, who was my first conducting teacher, really. He said, Boulez does all this conducting, some wonderful things, very clear and all that, but he never looks at the musicians. He never has eye contact with the musicians. It's a strange concept. I mean, for me, eye contact is everything, and that's the main reason to memorize your music as a conductor, from my point of view, is that you can then put the score aside and you can look at the musicians, because just a sign from the eye, just a sparkle in the eye to say, play. Then they'll play a little bit differently than they would have done before. That's what the conductor's for.
So you were studying keyboard and conducting at the same time, correct?
Yes.
The piano.
Yes, and harpsichord and organ. I studied harpsichord with Ralph Kirkpatrick at Yale, who was a very famous harpsichordist, kind of student of Wanda Landowska, who was the editor of the complete Scarlatti works in his own edition. Kirkpatrick, all 555 of the Scarlatti sonatas were ordered and put in shape by Kirkpatrick. And I studied with him for a couple of years at Yale.
Could you tell us about Mr. Kirkpatrick? About his character and his teaching style, and
well, his teaching style was very unorthodox indeed. In fact, I didn't understand anything about what he said. He would sit in his chair and he would say, "Play me this Scarlatti sonata or something," and I play it, and he'd say, "You didn't play it from your diaphragm," which is some organ somewhere in here. And I said, "I'm sorry." So he didn't really know I didn't really know what he was talking about. But as a player, he was quite captivating and very intellectually astute. I studied a Scarlatti course with him. There was also a Couperin course that he taught, and he tested me for that, but it was in French, so he determined that my French wasn't good enough, so I couldn't go in this Couperin course, so that was okay. But the Scarlatti course I was in.
So he was one of these
eccentric
from 20th century, beginning of 20th century musicians. They had lots of eccentrics. That's why it was so interesting.
Yeah, but there was not only Ralph Kirkpatrick, there was John Kirkpatrick. John Kirkpatrick was at Yale at the same time. And John Kirkpatrick was the Ives scholar. And John Kirkpatrick thought of himself as Ives reincarnated, although he couldn't have been because, Ives was alive at the same time as him. But I did hear John Kirkpatrick play the Concord Sonata, and it was fantastic. I mean, I've heard the Concord Sonata and I've studied it, and but John Kirkpatrick had this kind of religious fervor, New England Christian fervor, and when he played the Concord Sonata with all of these notes, and then these hymn tunes coming in there, it was like revelation. It was extraordinary. I've never heard it like that before, or since.
So how long was your time at Yale School of Music?
Just 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
And how did it connect it to your professional life?
Well, it was really a wonderful thing for me, because when I was in London and I was in England, I was really on the verge of having a professional career. And when I went to Yale, I took a step back from that, which was very important for me. I went back and I studied counterpoint. I studied, history of music, courses on Ives and Scarlatti and all that. And I was not pushed out in front of the public too soon. And I consider that a very wonderful thing. So I did not have to study, how to play in front of the public and how to show myself as a star performer or anything like that until much later. And after I came to after I went to Yale, I went to Illinois as a young professor in 1975, and then after that came all of the competition wins and in piano and conducting.
On your resume, there's also Menahem mentioned as one of your teachers. When did you come into contact with him?
Well, my teachers at Yale, I had two teachers. Ward Devaney was a longtime professor there at Yale, and he was extremely meticulous, very caring, and not so much in the limelight as a performer, but we had long sessions working on music. Also, Claude Frank was there. Claude Frank was a student of Arthur Schnabel, and he taught me many things, and I loved his style of playing and his sound. He played all the Beethoven sonatas. He was very much into the Schubert, Brahms, Mozart tradition of Schnabel, and then after I left Yale and I came to Illinois, I had the opportunity to contact Menachem Pressler, who was at that time the pianist in the Beaux-Arts trio, and he said, yes, come and study with me, come and play for me. And he lived in Indiana, which was 3 hours away from where I was in the University of Illinois. And so I worked with him for 4 or 5 years. And it was just the right time, because he gave me that extra sense of musical polish and warmth that I needed to express myself better at that time, and so thereafter I had some successes in international competitions, ending up with the Leeds competition in 1981.
We will talk about competition in a while. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting topic as itself. I myself studied with Arthur Sherman, who was also a contemporary of Menahem Pressler. I believe they studied with the same teacher in New York. But like Claude Frank, Arthur Schnabel, and all this previous generation of musicians, I also noticed that they possess something else that we have. It was, of course, different era, but could you talk about something about this to the next generation, the younger generation, who hasn't had a connection? We had a connection. I mean, I'm the probably last generation, one of the last generations to have that connection, who really kept the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century spirit. Could you describe something for the younger generation so that they can feel that or sort of know what it was like to have studied with these people and to interact with them, have interacted with them?
Well, we're always at the last generation, the last person who studied with so-and-so. And, as a young person in 1970, let's say, in London, I was able to go to a recital of Sviatoslav Richter, to go to many performances of Arthur Rubinstein, solo, and when he played 3 concertos in one night, which he did frequently. It was a little bit later that I heard Michelangeli, and I heard Horowitz twice in concert. And these are legendary things to do. You talk to people who came of age 3 or 4 or 5 years later. They say, "Oh my God, I wish I could have done that. I wish I could have heard that." And then the people that I knew, my manager, my friend in England, they said, "Oh well, I heard quarto. Things change quickly. I also heard some of the next generation, people like Earl Wild, people like Shura Tchaikovsky, people like Louis Kentner. You know, these are legendary performers, and they only died fairly recently. Abby Simon is still with us, and he's he was a student of Joseph Hoffman. So these things go on in a long time, over a long time period. But what to say to the younger generation? It's sad when you ask a student, well, did you hear so and so play this? Did you hear Rachmaninoff play this? Did you hear Rubinstein play this? And they say, no, I just been on YouTube and I heard so and so play it. And I said, well, why don't you go back and look and see if you can find something? Because the traditions of music and piano playing, especially piano playing, it depends on imagination. You can't just play the piano and just punch in the numbers and say, let's do this and do that. You have to use flights of fancy imagination in order to make this piano or any piano sound like something fantastical and something magical.
Keeping with that subject, I talked to many of older colleagues and who've experienced these things at these concerts, who've seen Richter Horowitz, Rubinstein in concert live, and most of them, I would say 99% of them, are not happy with what's going on these days. The younger generation of musicians, for them, is missing something, or it's not different in a way that doesn't satisfy their desire. What do you think that is? Is there a generation gap in expectations and artistic inclinations? And
yes, I mean it's very difficult to satisfy our older colleagues in terms of pianistic, musical, imaginational accomplishments. And that's understandable, because some of these people that they listen to are absolute giants. They may be giants only in a limited repertory, but when you hear Rachmaninoff play, or you hear Rubinstein play, and you hear him play some Chopin or Rachmaninoff, play some Rachmaninoff, it is with such authority and such truth behind it that it's very difficult to deny that, and for us in the modern era to try to do something like imitate that is usually folly. It's better to forge a new path, and that doesn't always make itself known to people of the older generation who say, well, it's not like the way it used to be. So this is just a fact of life.
Do you think it has to do with a span of time that has passed, whereas these giants were closer to, more or less, closer to the composers they're playing?
No, I don't think that has much to do with it, really. Because every generation has a different take on things. I mean, if you hear Ignaz Friedman play Chopin mazurkas, you would think that's the only way to play it. You'd think that is the authentic way. And he was in the 1920s. Then Rubinstein came along in the 1930s and 40s in a much more literal way, but also in a very authentic way. And so now people will say, okay, I think Rubinstein is more to our taste. So it's not that Friedman was closer to Chopin, because Friedman was 80 years after Chopin anyway. So the study of music and the trying to get back to the past, trying to get back to an authentic way of playing something, is constantly going on and is constantly changing. So I don't think it has anything to do with that.
Moving on to the lighter subject, did you ever meet these giants backstage, or did you shake hands? Did you meet them backstage? Did you ever get to meet them face to face?
I met Shura Cherkassky several times, and he was always wonderful, very interesting. I met Louis Kentner, and I met some people who were on juries at competitions that I was an entrance in. For example, Guido Agosti, who was a terrific pedagogue in Italy, also played very well but didn't play much in public, but knew his stuff tremendously. So yes, I met some of these people. I didn't meet Horowitz, but I was at Yale in the 70s, and I did a transcription of his Stars and Stripes Forever, which is a virtuoso piano piece based on Sousa, and I copied it down from the record, from the LP. So I had to drop the needle on the LP many times. It took me 2 or 3 days, and so I came up with this manuscript. And the director at Yale, the dean, said, "Well, that's very nice. Can I send this to Mr. Horowitz, because we want to get him to come to Yale to teach?" And so I said, okay. So he sent my manuscript to Vladimir Horowitz, and then a few weeks later, the dean said to me, well, he was very happy to receive it. He said, I don't have a copy of this music. So that's great. And that was the last I ever heard of it. But my manuscript is in the Yale Library of these transcriptions, which now appear in print all the time. The Carmen Fantasy and I don't know what, the Hungarian Rhapsodies that he transcribed. But this is really amazing stuff.
He must not be very happy about that, because from the rumors he was very protective.
Of course.
His bread and butter repertoire.
Yeah.
Moving on to competition. So what was the first competition that you attended, and how was the whole scene like?
The first international, really truly international one I did was in 1973. It was the Van Cliburn competition, and I won. I was just in the first round. I didn't get through the first round, but it was still a very interesting experience for me. And then in 1977, 4 years later, I went to the Van Cliburn competition again, and this time I was a finalist, won 5th prize. And that was the beginning of what I would call my competition pyramid, because I won 4th prize in the Leeds competition in 1978. And then I thought that I wasn't going to do any more competitions. I thought that was fine for me. I finished. But in 1979, I did the what became the William Capell competition in Maryland. And in 1980, I went to the Arthur Rubinstein competition in Tel Aviv. And there I won 2nd prize. So this was the second of 3 second prizes that I won. The following year I went to Beethoven competition in Vienna, won second prize, and in June, and then in September I went back to Leeds and won first prize. So I feel very fortunate that it went up this way and not down the other way, which has very often happened to people who've been to competitions many times. But it is certainly a route to performance and opportunity, the competition route. It's not for everybody, but it's a nerve-wracking but effective way of getting to do what you want. And there are many more competitions now than there were in my day.
Yes, during the 70s and 60s and 70s especially, competition was a great enterprise in a way. That they produced stars.
Yeah, it was very productive in that way. I had in the Leeds competition that I entered in 1981, there was a piano. It was one of the prizes for the first prize winner, Steinway piano. Also a tour with the English Chamber Orchestra, a performance with Sir George Solti at the London Philharmonic, etc. So it was, it's not so clear cut anymore.
So yeah, competition. The competition when you were doing competition as participant back then, 70s, and the competition now when you're actually judging the competition. How has it changed? Did the essence change?
I'm not sure about that. I think that the fact that there were fewer competitions in the 70s and the 80s than there are now means that the method of preparing for them was different. I think that people really were not quite sure what to do. There was a sense that competitions were a little bit different than performances. In other words, you had to be more careful about your performance in a competition than you would be in a normal recital venue, because of the way that the jury might perceive this, and that was something that I resisted. I didn't like the idea that I would play to please a jury. I didn't want to do that. But I was still mindful of the fact that I couldn't just go and do eccentric things and do play too fast or too loud or this or that. So I was a little bit careful about certain aspects of it, and I think in the early stages of my competition career that was shown to be a bad thing to do. In other words, I didn't take enough risks. I wasn't expressive enough. I wasn't myself enough, and so that I ended up with just a consolation prize or fourth or third prize or something like that. And when I decided I was really going to go for the music and go for exactly what I wanted to do, and damn the consequences, then I started really coming to the top, and that was a nice thing. And I don't know whether it was because I was just becoming more mature, and so my successes in competitions took place mainly in my late 20s, and I was 29 years old when I won the Leeds competition.
Does this statement still ring true to the participant these days?
Yes, I think so. I mean, as a jury member, I don't want to hear somebody being careful and cautious and hedging their bets. I want somebody to just go out there and make music and excite me. And I feel that my colleagues on the juries also, the good ones, they are delighted. They are thrilled. We're all thrilled when we hear somebody. Wow, did you hear that? This is a magnificent performance of such and such. It's nothing to do with the competition performance. It's a real performance, whether it has mistakes or it doesn't have mistakes. But it's something that is really thrilling in and of itself.
But do those competitors end up winning?
They do if I'm on the jury, and people like me are on the jury. They don't if people who are, bean counters are on the jury. No. But that's always the way it's been.
And now can we move on to your artistic career after the competition? You started to play lots of concerts and then sort of started off your professional career. Could you tell us about that, how it transitioned and how your life changed?
Well, yes, I was teaching at the University of Illinois in 1981. I won the Leeds competition in September of 81, and I took a semester, the spring of 82, off so that I could go around the world and do competition and do concerts. And I did concerts from New Zealand to Amsterdam to Germany to who knows where. I mean, I was playing all over the place. But I always knew that I wanted to continue as in an academic post, so that I wasn't going to just be a touring virtuoso all my life. And so that's what I did. And it may be that inhibited my career in the traditional sense, that I wasn't constantly on a tour, I wasn't constantly on the minds of orchestras, committees who are searching for new soloists every year. So, but I don't regret that, because I was interested in so many other things. I was interested in teaching per se. I was interested in conducting, and I was interested in founding my orchestra, which I did in 1984, chamber orchestra, from which I could not only conduct from the podium, but also do many performances from the keyboard, conducting from the keyboard, Mozart concertos, Ravel, Saint-Saëns, and other things that not many people do. So this was something that I was particularly interested in doing.
In those years of activities, what was most pleasurable about being a pianist, and what was most difficult part in being pianist?
Well, I think that people don't take young pianists that seriously. They think of them as trophies. You play a competition, you win a competition, and then you go to the next music club, or you go to the next music society, and you are presented as the winner of the Leeds competition or the winner of the Van Cliburn competition, and then then you're discarded by the public to some extent in favor of the next one who's going to come along. And so I didn't enjoy that aspect of it, being a kind of prize of the system. I wanted to do my own thing, and but when you participate in the system, you have to partake of the system too. You cannot just pick and choose. So I'm very grateful to the accolades given to me by winning these competitions, and it helped me a lot. It helped me to learn to be tougher, to be resilient in my learning of my performances, and it helped me to go on to other things in music, which interested me more, perhaps, chamber music or recording of music with other people, choral music or instrumental music with piano, etc. So I consider it all positive in the end.
Can I ask another question about performance life in playing pianos? When you prepare for a performance, you need to make a program. You need to prepare for it, and then you go on the stage. You interact with audience, and maybe you have a dinner with organizer afterwards. There's a process. Could you tell us about how you prepare for the concert, and also what happens after the concert usually, and how you feel, and what is your method of preparation?
I know that some performing pianists and artists dread the social interactions. They don't like that they have to go and have dinner with so and so. They don't, they are somewhat reclusive. They don't like to do this. I'm not like that. I enjoy it very much. I enjoy very much the social interaction with the sponsors, with the people who put on the competition, the concerts, and I enjoy that very much. In terms of preparation for the concert, what I usually do, if I have a concert in the afternoon, I will practice in the morning, early in the morning, then take a nap, then do the concert, and then after the concert, I'm happy to socialize and interact with people. If I have an evening concert, what I like to do is again practice in the morning, then have a good lunch, and then take a nap, and sleep, and then I'm fresh for the evening. Everybody has a different routine for this ritual of concert performing, and of course it depends on the repertoire. If you're playing something, if you're playing a concerto that you never played before, it's very nerve-wracking, and it can be quite difficult to prepare for it.
Do you prefer playing solo recital or a concerto?
I don't mind. I do both kinds. Most often I'm playing a concerto with my orchestra when I'm conducting from the keyboard, or I'm doing a solo recital. But I don't have a preference for one or the other.
Out of many concerts that you had, what was the most memorable concert?
Well, I would have to say that the concert with Sir George Solti was a very special one for me in London. It was shortly after the Leeds competition, and I was doing a tour of the English Chamber Orchestra with Mozart 595, the last piano concerto. Every night in a different town in the British Isles. And on the night off, I had to come down to London and play Beethoven's Second with Sir George Solti. And so it was a very intense time. And Sir George Solti was conducting on this program. I was doing Beethoven's Second, which, as you know, is his most light-hearted, his first piano concerto excursion. And on this program, Sir George Solti was conducting Leonora No. 3, La Mer of Debussy, and Elliott Carter's Concerto for Orchestra. And I had this little Beethoven's Second concerto in the middle of all of this. And he was a tremendously energetic conductor. I mean, he was legendary for this. There was an electricity that came out of him. So when we did the Beethoven, it was just so exciting and so riveting, the way that he would do it. And we had some issues about the end of the cadenza, where he was wondering what I was going to do. It's a scale that goes up and up and up, and it's not easy to count. And he had to come on time, and so we had some issues back and forth about that. But otherwise, it was a wonderful experience.
Was Schulte a very commanding person?
Yes. Yes.
So he had a precise idea of how music had to go.
Yes, to some extent, yes. But we didn't have any arguments about that. But he said to me, I would have died if I had to play that piece in this program. You know, because it was such a powerful program, and he was conducting, these great explosive masterpieces, and I was playing Beethoven's Little Piano Concerto. But it was a lovely experience.
That shows he had a compassion.
Oh yeah, he was a very, very human person.
I would like to ask you about two other subjects. Recording. You've done loads of recording, and when you do recording, it's not just like one CD. You seem to do like whole repertoire of a composer. You do series. You do projects. How did you come about doing these recordings, and what gave you what motivated you to go about these huge projects of conquering each composers?
My first recordings were really after the Leeds competition. I did the Mozart two concertos, the A major and the C minor, with the English Chamber Orchestra, and I did the Chopin Etudes, 24 Etudes. And then as a third project that they offered to me, this is EMI, I did the Rachmaninoff transcriptions, which I had long played. After that, then I was approached by other people, particularly Arabesque Records in America. And they said to me, "Oh, you play all these transcriptions. I want you to do the Godowsky Chopin Etudes, recording of those." And I said, "Well, how about if I do one of those, and I do Rosenthal, and I do this and that, And they said, "No, I want you to do the Godowsky Chopin Etudes." So I said, "Okay." So then I went away and got the music of the stuff, and I studied the ones that I really liked, which were amounted to 18. I practiced them a long, long time, and then I recorded them. So that got me on that track. After that, they asked me to do the Hummel sonatas, which were Johann Nepomuk Hummel, who was a great contemporary of Beethoven, and so I got to know those pieces and recorded them. And then, that led me to an ambition that I had, which was to play the Beethoven sonatas, the 32 Beethoven sonatas. And I did that, I think, in 1987. And then in the early 90s, I got the opportunity to record those. And then after that, I started going into other composers that I really wanted to explore, such as Chopin, such as Schumann and Brahms. Ravel's music I had played, Debussy's I had not. But this year I'm going to be playing the complete works of Ravel and Debussy for one piano, solo piano, which amounts to 6 recitals. And so, it's not that I set out to take over all the repertoire of the world, but one thing leads to another, and I get interested in things, and then I record them or perform them in public.
From exploring all these different repertoires, and I'm sure you will explore more repertoires to come, but up to now, what remains the most dear to you out of all this repertoire, the composer or a piece in particular?
I don't know. There's certain pieces of Chopin that I love from years ago, when I was like 15, that I love to play, like the Scherzo number 4 or one of the ballades. But in studying all of the music, I become familiar with pieces that have become my favorites since then. Things like the Barcarolle of Chopin, or the Polonaise Fantasy, which is not played so often, but is a very beautiful piece and a kind of mystical piece in a way. And then when you look at the repertoire of Chopin, it's mostly familiar, but with Schumann, it's not so familiar. I mean, there are certain pieces that we know, the early pieces, but the later pieces, there's some magnificent discoveries to be made, like the romances, Opus 28, of which we only know the second one, which is so beautiful. But the number 1 and 3 are wonderful too. And then there are, pieces like the Waldscenen, which are so imaginative and products of his genius in later life. So, there are all sorts of discoveries. We never end with discoveries in piano repertoire because it's so much more than for any other instrument. So much more music.
This question is probably very interesting to the listeners, but how is a recording different from live when you play? I mean, do you prepare them in different way, or how do you need to be prepared mentally, physically? How's recording different from live?
It's a good question. I approached, when I was first recording in the 80s, I was doing things as a live performance. I was trying to, short pieces, I would try to get them in complete takes. And I would do endless complete takes, in case I got it exactly right. But in later years, I think, no, I know what the complete take is. I know what the timing is. Let me just concentrate on this page. Let me concentrate on this 4 parts and get it the way I want it to, and put it together with the engineer. And that's worked out very well. I think that I'm better at that now. I'm better in choosing the way to approach something, rather than going at it like a chicken at a fence. Trying to get something right in every detail, no matter what it takes. And it's not a satisfying result in the end that way.
But this ability and knowledge comes with experience.
Experience, yes.
But what would you tell to the first time the young pianist who's recording for the first time in his or her life? What would your counsel be? Wise advice be?
Be prepared. It's like Boy Scouts' motto. You have to try to approach the music in as calm a way as possible, and be able to play it in different fashions, not just one way. Different tempos. Be flexible in the way that you approach the music, and just remember that you only have to get it right once. You don't have to worry if it doesn't work out the first take.
Okay, moving on to the last subject, we would like to ask you about your life as pedagogue. Do you like teaching?
Oh yes, I like teaching. Yes.
The reason that I ask you is that I started to teach about 10 years ago, and prior to that I was exclusively performing. And when I started to teach, it was completely different experience. But with that came enormous responsibility and also huge stress. It's very difficult because, you know, when you practice just for yourself, you know your limits, you know what you can do, you know yourself, so you know what to do. But when you deal with students, you simply don't know how they're listening to the sound, how they're perceiving in their brains. You cannot get into their brain. There's so many unknown uncertainties, and to deal with that for me was complete catastrophe. How was your first teaching experience?
Well, my first teaching was at Yale as a graduate assistant. So I had certain students that I would teach, and they were very good. I mean, they were not piano majors, but they were playing difficult pieces. I remember the Brahms Handel variations, which I hadn't come across before as a teacher, and things like this. And you always, with me, it's a matter of dealing with individuals. It's not a way of a formulaic way of teaching this piece. If I teach Ballade No. 1 of Chopin, I'm always going to teach it the same way. No, I don't do that. I see what the student brings to it, and then see what the student needs in terms of my advice or help, and thereby I learn a lot of things about the piece. I learn a lot of things about teaching. It's an interactive process. So I came up, I was only 19 or 20 when I started to do this teaching, and then I started teaching at Illinois, and I was also very young. So I've been doing it for a very, very long time. And sometimes, in the early days particularly, I felt, I don't know what to say about this. I mean, it's either so bad or it's so good, rarely, that I don't know what to say about it. But you have to find ways of saying something. You have to find ways of starting a discussion. And now I am never lost for words. If somebody plays, no matter how well or how badly they play, I always know something to say to get them, to guide them to something a little bit different.
So, Mr. Hobson, if you were born again, will you still be pianist?
I have no idea.
Do you have any regrets?
No, none at all. No, because it's the piano is something that is multifaceted. You can make the piano sound like an orchestra. You can make the piano sound like voice. And we're always asking our students, make this sound like a violin, or make this sound like an oboe, or something like that. And I speak to my oboe colleagues and my violin colleagues, and I say, do you ever ask them to make your instrument sound like a piano? Never. So we have something which is a very functional instrument and can do anything, but it's very difficult to play. It's the most difficult instrument to play well. These other instruments, they're very difficult to make a sound on, to start with, or a sound that's acceptable to people's ears. Piano is easy, just play. But to play well, and to play with balance, and to play with real meaning is extremely difficult on the piano.
Okay, Mr. Hobson, to sum it up, if you have a message to pass on to the next generation of pianists, young students who are just starting off, or young pianists who are just going into making decision to take this as a professional career, or if you have a message to pass on, what is it?
Well, I guess I have, first of all, a cynical message, which is what I've had for many, many years. It's not like it's a new thing. If you want to study piano, study piano. If you are in doubt about whether you want to study music, or you want to study medicine, or you want to study English literature, or you want to study geography, study something else than music, because it requires such dedication. You cannot go into it half-heartedly. You cannot go into it thinking, I want to get my degree in 3 years and then I want to make money, because it doesn't work that way in music. It is something that is dedication, demands dedication. It demands love and passion about the profession, about the music, about the dedication to teaching, and I'm happy to say that so many of my students have that passion and are doing extremely well. You may not be just teaching in one place. You may have to be a peripatetic teacher. You may have to teach in many different places, or you may have to do some performing, some chamber music, some accompanying, some teaching of historic music or something like that, or pedagogy, in order to make a living. But that's great. You know, it's what we're studying for and what we believe in. So it's not necessarily a lucrative profession where you can guarantee that you have a wonderful career and a wonderful security in your job, but you have the love of your passion for what you're doing, and that is the most important thing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hobson.